Bord Gáis Energy, proud sponsor of the GAA All-Ireland Under-20 and Senior Hurling Championships. Hashtag Hurling to the Core.
Hello and welcome to the Throw-In Independent.ie's GAA podcast in association with Bord Gáis Energy. I'm Will Slattery and I'm delighted to be joined for our All-Ireland football final preview by Michael Verney and Conor McKeon. Lads, how are things?
How's it going, Will?
And guys, I suppose after the semi-finals, we had our discussion about, I suppose, the future of the football championship and Dublin's dominance. So we can maybe park some of those issues today and focus more on the actual matchup between Dublin and Mayo, Conor. And I know on Monday in the paper, you kind of went through Mayo's All-Ireland final heartbreak over the last, I think 31 years. It hasn't been a happy hunting ground for them. I suppose, interestingly, this team, although there are a couple of veteran players who have been around, from previous final defeats, I think around half of the team is even new from the semi-final loss to Dublin last year. So it really is a new team that James Horan has at his disposal this year. Like, does that change things for you coming into this game versus maybe how it went last year, or how are you looking at it?
Well, first of all, I think the issue about the previous finals, that's definitely sort of a Mayo football issue rather than the Mayo footballers of this team's issue. They've never, to their eternal credit, the best performance they ever put up in an All-Ireland final was 3 years ago, which was, having lost the 8 previous finals that the county were in. And they never wore that sort of, it never looked like something that was hanging around their necks. They didn't seem to be particularly weighed down by it, and they don't. They're obviously a very resilient bunch. But I don't think they've ever, it'd be one thing if you were coming into an All-Ireland final with this team if they'd have had those sort of blowouts that they had against Kerry in 04 and 06. Then I'd understand coming up with this kind of sense of dread. But this group of Mayo players, and particularly under James Horan, they've always seemed to be incredibly just sort of goal orientated. Every time they've lost the final, they've tried to use it in some way as a building block to go and try and win it again. And I think they probably just see it nearly as this, whether it's their destiny or this kind of quest that they're on. And, if you have to lose a couple of finals on the way to winning one, so be it. That's an experience that you have to go through. And I think it's important to highlight as well, they've changed the perception of themselves as well, in Croke Park. They've won some huge games in Croke Park. They've beaten basically everybody other than Dublin. And I think even the rivalry with Dublin, I know it's 8 years since they've beaten Dublin in a match of any description, which is incredible considering how often they've played them. I still don't think that that's going to sort of infect their psyche, if you want to put it that way, coming up to this match. But, the issue about the new players is very, very pertinent. I thought last year in the semi-final, in the second half, when Dublin got that press on, and it was almost like a power play in ice hockey. They completely overwhelmed Mayo in that period of time. But I think they look like they lacked legs. That they look like a team that were starting to get older as Dublin were sort of getting younger because of some of the players who come into the team. So I think it's a very deliberate thing that James Horan has done. I mean, I don't think it's any coincidence that there's a new player in every line of the team if you go through it. Oisin Mullen and Owen McLaughlin, and Matthew Ruan's been there for a season, but he's still only played maybe 9 or 10 championship matches. Ryan O'Donoghue and obviously Tommy Conroy as well. So they have freshened up the team, and I think the effect that it has had will be much more, in terms of their ability to stay with Dublin athletically, rather than, they needed to bring in some new faces so they didn't remind themselves that they'd lost to Dublin in the past. I actually don't see that being a factor in this game at all on Saturday.
Yeah, Michael, and one interesting aspect of Saturday is obviously it will be behind closed doors. It isn't the same build-up as they would have had the previous finals. Does that benefit Mayo? I suppose the pressure that comes with getting to another final and having not won one in so long, and young players getting their first taste of it, does being maybe slightly shielded from the hype or the build-up, does that help them, do you think?
Yeah, I wouldn't think it does any harm, Will, to be honest with you. But I think even more so, I think it's a huge benefit during games. When Dublin turn the screw on a team and you feel like the world is caving in around you, and every time David Clark steps up to a kick out, there's almost like this volume of noise and there's an expectancy that Dublin are going to win the kick out. I think that definitely helps, particularly underdog teams. Kate Kirby had a tweet out there a couple of weeks ago, the sports psychologist, just thinking now low-key build-ups and even lack of crowds in games definitely helps underdogs. And I'd have to agree with that. Like if you're looking at, just say if you look back to the Waterford Kilkenny All-Ireland semi-final, when Kilkenny are 9 points up, TJ Reid scores that second goal, you're kind of thinking if a crowd was there, maybe Waterford might cave in a small bit, but they didn't, and you're able to maybe turn around momentum quite quickly as a result of that. So I definitely think that's an added thing with Mayo. Like, the Hill and the Dublin support as well is a little advantage to Dublin, particularly when they're getting on top. I can't imagine as an opposition player what's going on in your mind when all of that is building up. So to me, that has to be a small advantage to Mayo, that when maybe Dublin turn the screw or go through their purple patch, that maybe it's a little less daunting from a Mayo point of view.
Yeah, and Conor, from a Dublin perspective, if you're trying to pick out maybe interesting talking points before a match, considering the run they've had to the final, there's probably not much you can pick out from the games themselves. But one interesting thing I've found is, I suppose, having Paul Mannion and Brian Howard on the bench. You have a guy in Mannion who's won 3 consecutive All-Stars, Howard 2 consecutive All-Stars, and neither of them can get in the starting team. Now, I know Mannion was maybe carrying an injury into the championship, so he didn't get to hit the ground running, but just even the team selection element of it is a bit interesting, considering he has those big guys in reserve.
Yeah, I think it probably suits Dessie Farrell as well to have those guys on the bench, because if things aren't working and you need to boost the team, like how many times did Dublin win All Irelands against usually against Mayo or Kerry, bringing fellas like Paul Flynn and Michael Darragh Macaulay and Bernard Brogan off the bench. So while it's good to have, and like those players are now starting to filter away, they're not making the impact of old. With Kevin McManaman, I don't think got off the bench the last day. Philly McMahon is really the only one from that set who made an impact off the bench the last day. So, I think when you have players of that quality, there's probably no chance that Dublin are going to be blown out of it next Saturday night. That's not an outcome I don't think anybody is really envisaging. So I think no matter what situation the game is in, going into the last 10 minutes, being able to bring on a fresh Paul Mannion or being able to bring on a fresh Brian Howard, I think is a huge thing. I'm starting to think that Howard might start. He's probably the one of the two that, you just want on the pitch at the very start. He's so versatile. If you remember, he played so many roles in the 2 All-Ireland finals last year. He was catching kickouts. When Dublin went down to 14 men, he was actually taking the ball from Stephen Cluxon and running the ball out of defence because Kerry had an extra man and they were able to press everywhere on the pitch. And Howard's sidestep is sort of ridiculous. He goes at a 90-degree angle and nobody can lay a hand on him. So he's such a smooth ball carrier that I think, whatever the issue is over him before, he looks like he's back. And I can't imagine that they're going to leave him on the bench. But this match will essentially come down to a series of matchups. I think Dublin and Mayo will both play with a +1 at the back, because that's the way both of them like to play. I don't think either team will change their system for the other one. And then it'll come down to the other 13 outfield players, all trying to win their individual battles, and how some of them pair up are going to be really interesting. As Michael said, though, the Mayo kick-out is just really, really interesting because, particularly on a cold day when the ball just doesn't fly quite as far anymore, if Clark doesn't get an early kick-out away, Dublin will go after it absolutely voraciously. And if they win 2 kick-outs in a row, it can just become an avalanche. Now, Mayo have sort of been through that, even those horrible experiences can stand to you because you know what it feels like and you know where you went wrong before. And they'll have a plan to, look, this is the go-to kick-out. This is how we're going to guarantee that we get the third one into a Mayo pair of hands. But, the problem with Dublin is sometimes that can be too late. They can, when they pounce, they're going to pounce hard. But, the kickouts and the matchups, I think, are effectively what will win and lose the game on Saturday. And if Mayo can crack both of them, win enough of their own kickouts, and don't go through a period where they get savaged on their own kickouts, and if they win 8 or 9 of the matchups, they have every chance of winning the game.
Conor, just a quick one there. You mentioned about matchups and obviously even how maybe Kevin McManaman and Michael Darragh and these guys don't have as much of an influence, and there's a lot maybe less older faces knocking around the place. Philly McMahon's role, do you see what do you see his role as? Is that a case of if Aidan O'Shea is part at the edge of the square, do you see him coming in, or like he was very good even when he came in on Thomas Callaghan the other day? What sort of role do you see for him?
Yeah, I think that's the only role that Philly McMahon is going to play. They did it last year when Tommy Walsh, if you remember, when Kerry were about to bring Tommy Walsh on the replay, Philly was already grappling with him on the sideline. All of a sudden he was summoned up, and he loves that as well. Philly will You know, Philly was having great joy in just punching the ball away from Gallagher last week, and he's physically so strong. He obviously wouldn't have as big a frame as Aidan O'Shea, but he's a monster when it comes to just physical strength. So yeah, like it's interesting because I don't think Philly will start, and I think the Dublin player that would be the best physical matchup for him if he goes into full forward would be Davy Byrne. But again, like I don't really think that Davy Byrne, you know, I don't think that matchup will suit him close to goal. So they'll have to find a way of whoever Dublin's +1 is, if it's Johnny Cooper or even if it's Robbie McDade, he might have to come back and sit in front, because Dublin have done that before a lot with Aidan O'Shea, and they've done it with Tommy Walsh and other players, where the best way to mark these players is you actually just get a crowd around them. Okay, if he wants to bring the ball down, that's fine. Now that's different now because obviously the offensive mark, and that could come into it as well. But before, like where Dublin dealt really effectively with Aidan O'Shea, they'd have Keane O'Sullivan dropping back and standing in front of him, and Philly McMahon standing behind them. And effectively in that situation, you know, you'd want to do something outrageous to come out with a clean possession. So that would be a big one. And I could envisage that if O'Shea goes into the edge of the square, particularly late on, if Mayo are looking for a goal, that's where Philly McMahon will come in, and that's where he'll get his chance to do a bit of grappling.
Yeah, Michael, on the other end of the pitch, the matchups are interesting as well. Like, I suppose when Mayo have had success in individual matchups against Dublin in some of those finals, you had, you know, Colin Boyle, Keith Higgins, you know, 2 all-star defenders, you know, Brendan Harrison, another one. Like, none of them would probably be in from the start, you know, against Dublin in the final. That's 3 key defenders who were able to, you know, shackle Dublin's forwards to an extent. And now you have like guys like Conor McKeon, Dean Rock in such lethal form in front of goal, that it's maybe, is it harder to see them being able to stifle them now when you have that experienced core gone?
Yeah, a small bit. And even Lee Keegan's an outstanding player, but he did look a bit susceptible in the semi-final. He slipped at one stage, and Quinlivan had a great goal chance. He was caught under a high ball another stage. So, and like we saw how much, not that he struggled, I think anybody probably would have, but Con kind of left him for dead for that goal in the All-Ireland semi-final last year as well. So be interesting to see who he picks up, or whether he goes out to the half line maybe. But they are down. It says those guys that really went toe to toe with the, you know, the cream of Dublin's forwards over the, you know, in recent years in big final games will not be present unless there's someone parachuted into the fray, and I can't really see that happening. So I don't know if they definitely won't be taking them on, maybe man for man, maybe as much as they have in other years, because I don't know if personnel wise if they match up half as well as they did a couple of years ago. So as Conor says, that probably 7 defenders going to have to play a huge role to make sure that no defender is left isolated one-on-one. Dublin will not be isolated one-on-one. The Dublin defenders won't be left isolated one-on-one at the other end. So it's huge that Mayo don't let that happen the other end as well.
Yeah, I think as well, like if you're looking at the matchups, like Brian Fenton and Kieran Kilkenny are now running this Dublin team, and like they're the guys that you just have to stop. In the 2017 final, Lee Keegan did a great job of just hounding Kieran Kilkenny wherever he went on the park, but he just doesn't look like he's moving as well as he did before. So I don't know, like a fully fit, in proper form Lee Keegan, I think that's a great matchup on Kieran Kilkenny, particularly because Kilkenny will go inside. He'll swap with Con a lot during the game. But what has surprised me about Dublin this year, and something that I didn't see happening, was that now Con has become almost the new Paul Flynn. If you look at the amount of work that he got through out around the middle third of the pitch, in the Leinster final, I think he caught 3 clean kickouts. Now, this is a dimension to Con's game I never really saw before. So he's essentially doing the same job as Kieran Kilkenny, and they're kind of rotating and switching with each other the whole time. So, you know, I don't know how you're going to keep 2 of them. And this is the problem with Dublin, is when you start to do your matchups, you know, like, okay, you have to take great care on who you put on Con O'Callaghan. You have to make sure that there's somebody who's physically able to go with Kieran Kilkenny. But then you've Dean Rock, like, you know, who at 30 or 31 now is in the scoring form of his life, you know. And, you know, if you watch them against Monaghan, all he was doing was standing in that pocket of space just to the left of the goal, 35 yards out. But they know how to generate those kind of matchups, you know. And the same with Fenton, you know, like Rowan is a very athletic midfielder. He can definitely get around the park. But if you set up, you know, as Dublin do, a one-on-one, and Fenton can just show the ball and then go past a player with one movement. If that is the situation that happens at the weekend, when Fenton goes past Rowan, if that is the matchup, you know, he's gonna end up with 3 or 4 scoring chances. So, you know, you just think that in doing matchups, James Horan has a little bit more. He'll have to use imagination a bit more than Dessie Farrell will.
Mm. And Michael, I suppose there has been a good bit of focus on the 6 in a row bid that Dublin are going for, but I suppose another record that a number of the squad are looking to match is that 8 All-Ireland medal haul that the few Kerry greats got from the golden years. Like, I know James McCarthy and Stephen Cluxton are the two men who've started all those finals up to now, but there's other members of the squad, Philly McMahon, Michael Fitzsimons, who've been around for them all too. It'd be some achievement in an era where they've kind of every year been putting up new records, but to match that, 8 medal haul will be something pretty special.
Ah, yeah, unbelievable. And first, there's a lot of records to go this weekend. Dessie Farrell as well is going to try and join an elite crew as minor under 21 and senior All-Ireland winning manager. I think from the records I can see, and it looks like only Cyril Farrell has done it in hurling, and Jack O'Connor and Mickey Hart in football. So that would be phenomenal, and that would all be within a 10-year period from 2011 to 2020, which would be unbelievable as well. James McCarthy, as I said, he's the only outfield player that will have potentially have started all of 8 of those All-Ireland wins if they do win on Saturday night. It's been a decade of dominance, a decade of destruction, really. The fact that, like, if you look, I think it's a 6-point spread they're saying for the game on Saturday night. I don't think there's ever been anything like that coming into any of their other finals against Mayo. They've always been, a point or two, a really, really close run thing. But I think probably that kind of 12-minute spell at the start of the second half of last year's semi-final is probably hanging over probably a lot of people's kind of judgments, and just how Dublin have been able to keep everyone at arm's length this year as well. Listen, they're all these records they're chasing. Like, Brian Fenton still hasn't lost a championship match. You know what I mean? It's just it's crazy, really, when you put it all down. There's records have dropped already, and you'd be very surprised if a lot more records don't drop on Saturday evening.
Yeah, Conor, one interesting part of this year is that as Jack McCaffrey obviously stepped away, and I'm sure you probably had heard at this stage the interview he did with Bernard Brogan last week, which touched on a wide range of issues. But I suppose him opting to step away this year and why, he sort of sounded like he felt a bit burnt out from the 5 in a row chase. And it's interesting, you've heard a few people probably mention that the 5 in a row really did weigh on them a bit in terms of, getting over the line for history. Do you get the sense that, do they feel burdened by 6, or was it 5 was the big one and now it's almost like a reset, even though it's the same kind of run, that the 5 was the big one to get over the line for, and now they've kind of, with a new management team as well, been able to reset a little bit?
Yeah, I got the sense from after the 3 in a row and after the 4 in a row, talking to some of them, that they were still kind of immersed in this. They didn't say it, but I think they had their sights set on it from the 2017 probably, when they won 3 in a row. And last year it did feel much more like it was the end of something, and obviously when James stepped away, it was the end of something. But I think of all the teams in the country, the lockdown and the break and the cessation of training and everything else has probably suited Dublin best, because they're a very, very self-motivated group. So they will have, they all played club football to a high standard. They all kept themselves in immaculate nick. But I think just being away from the intensity of, being the Dublin football team and preparing to win an All-Ireland, it does take an awful lot out of players. You could hear that they came across in Jack McCaffrey when, this absolute sinking feeling that he had that the match was going to a replay. Like, it was only another week or whatever it was, and he just, I can't believe we have to do this again. And like most people would spend our lives dreaming of having to play in an All-Ireland final, and Jack couldn't bring himself to kind of show up for training. So I think that shows on some level what they put into it, they devote an awful lot of their time, not just on the training pitch, but away from it, how they live their lives and everything else. But, I suppose the thing with the Dublin squad, and you don't get a sense of this during the season, because obviously, everything that comes out of there is kind of carefully packaged for public consumption. But there's an awful lot of different kind of characters there. Like you got a sense from listening to Jack McCaffrey that he was really happy with the decision that he's made. So it doesn't matter if Dublin win the All-Ireland at the weekend. Jack McCaffrey's not going to be sitting around saying, I wish I was there. Maybe he wishes he was there on the day itself. But all the stuff to put into it, he just didn't need to put himself through that. But if you ever talk to James McCarthy, like, this is a guy you'll have to shoot, I'd say, to get out of a Dublin jersey, because he lives and breathes this every day of his life. This, more than nearly any of the players in the squad, is the defining characteristic of James McCarthy. He is James McCarthy, the Dublin footballer. So, it's kind of it's a delicate ecosystem, and I think Dessie Farrell, He won't get a whole pile of credit if Dublin win the All-Ireland at the weekend, because people will say, well, you took the greatest team of all time who'd won 5 in a row to 6 in a row. But I think the challenge in kind of taking on what they've done and been able to let them sort of organically grow or re-energize or whatever it is that Dublin have done, I think he deserves great credit for that, because there was definitely the possibility that the 5 in a row would be such a release of kind of, stress and pressure and everything else that they mightn't get themselves back up for the season, but very clearly they have.
Conor, do you think even Dessie coming in and just the fact that it's different voices and a load of different faces even in the backroom team, like Gavin stepping away when he did, like the hardest thing is probably to get off, a winning train. The easy thing would be to stay going and probably go after you lose. Do you think that's kind of re-energized the whole thing? He made a comment last week. He just said, we had that conversation around the sort of hunger, the appetite, the desire. We developed a plan and we made ourselves accountable to executing that. That's what we've done. He said, there's been no issue with hunger or desire from his respect. Like, do you think it's a big thing even for players, I would say, just to have, they've been winning for so long and they've been listening to the same voices and unbelievable voices, the best coaches and managers we'll probably ever see. But that can only be a help when, like, standards aren't going to drop under Dessie, realistically. It's just a different voice saying a lot of the same things, probably.
Yeah, and I think, like, Dessie, when we look back at this era for Dublin football, I think for whatever reason that people think that Dublin have achieved so much success, I'm not sure that any county has ever had a succession of managers like Dublin have had in Pat Gilroy, Jim Gavin and Dessie Farrell. They're like serious men, seriously capable, who put an awful lot into this and for whom it means an awful lot. And I think the change of voice at the top of the room is definitely an interesting point, because I think Dessie is quite a different character to Jim Gavin in his management persona. Jim was obviously very structured in kind of, this is the framework that we put in place. You do it to your highest standards. Whereas Dessie Farrell, I think he's a different kind of a general. He's the sort of fellas that sort of manager the players want to go to war for. I think his managerial sort of persona might be slightly different from Jim Gavin's. And I think, after that length of time, it doesn't matter who your manager is. I think a change can be a good thing, provided you're not going to let standards slip. And like Dessie, for all he's achieved in the underage ranks as a manager, as a player he had some very, very tough defeats. All-Ireland semi-finals that Dublin should have won, All-Ireland finals that they were expected to win. So, he won't want to let this slip on his watch, and that's nearly the poison chalice that Dessie took on. He knew that no matter what he did in terms of success, he would get very, very limited praise for that. And yet, if there's anything other than perfection, if they don't win in All-Ireland, it will nearly be seen as, well, he wasn't quite up to what Jim Gavin did, But again, I think that the leaders in that group are so strong. People like Stephen Cluxon and James McCarthy and Johnny Cooper, they wouldn't let their standards fall. And if they saw players that were allowing the standards to fall in the group, they just get rid of them, because they have that facility to do it,
And interestingly, in that Jack McCaffrey interview, he mentioned that the only reason he even went back for the National League was because of Dessie Farrell and the personal relationship that he has with him. So maybe, I suppose, he might be a little closer to the players than Jim Gavin was, who seemed to like to keep his distance as the manager. So maybe we might finish off with predictions. Michael, I'll go to you first. Dublin Mayo this Saturday. Who do you think will come out on top?
I think Dublin will be winning at half time and they'll be winning at full time. I think they'll have maybe 2 or 3 to spare at half time, and I think they'll turn the screw. And I actually think they'll cover the handicap spread of 6. And that's not to say that it's going to be comfortable or anything. I think it'll be very tight, but probably down the stretch you could easily see them getting a goal or two, even third quarter, early kind of last quarter. I think it'll be around the 7-point mark. That's not to say it will be at all easy. I don't think it will be. I just think even if things are going wrong, or Sean Bugler or some of the newer faces are struggling, the guys they have to bring in off the bench, like if Paul Mannion doesn't start, and even if Brian Howard doesn't start, the faces that they have to bring in to steady any sort of rocky ship are just absolutely outstanding. And it's very with the best will in the world, and the game taking place 6 days before Christmas, you think it's almost written in the stars for the green and red of Mayo to go and do it, but just can't see it, to be honest with you.
Conor?
Yeah, like I do think Mayo have a chance, which is more than we could say for, I think, any of the other opposition that Dublin have faced. But I think like you're looking for nearly a disproportionate number of things to go in their favour. You know, like you're talking about all your planets aligning. Like they're going to have to make sure that they, you know, when Dublin have a spell of dominance, Mayo find a way to minimise that. Whatever that means, time waste, you know, win a kick out, they need to do that. They'll have to target players like, you know, Robbie McDade, for instance, hasn't been put under any great defensive pressure, you know, so far this year. He scored 1-2 the last day, but, you know, Kevin McLaughlin or something like that would have to go after him. And I think they'll probably have to get a couple of goals and limit Dublin's best players, Fenton, Kilkenny particularly. So can they do all those things? Yeah, they can, but are they likely to do them all on the same afternoon? I don't think so. I think it might be a bit tighter, but I think the one thing that has defined this rivalry over the last 10 years or whatever is Dublin's big players' ability to do the right thing at the end of games when the pressure has come under them the very most. And they still have all those big players. And I think, you know, those players will steer Dublin to another victory, but it could be only 2 or 3 points.
Just on what Conor said there as well, Dublin's big players always come to the fore in these big games. And I suppose it maybe has been questioned whether Aidan O'Shea and maybe Cillian O'Connor have had their best games in these really big games. Now, they've both had brilliant years, and you could say Cillian O'Connor is probably playing the football of his career. If those two guys step up and, you know, deliver, you're looking for that. You're looking for the majority of them to deliver, you know, a game of games. And as Conor says, for a disproportionate amount of things to go their favour. I just find it hard to see it, but hopefully I'd gladly be wrong.
Yeah, well, it's interesting, I suppose, if you look at the All-Ireland finals Dublin have won, it's very rare that all the big guys have fired on all cylinders. You know, you've had games where Keegan has nullified Kilkenny, but then, you know, Dean Rock steps up and kicks some really important scores. Like in the you know, drawn final last year, Jack Barry did a good job in Brian Fenton again. Jack McCaffrey stepped up, and in the replay, it was O'Callaghan and Kilkenny. But I suppose the trick for Mayo is trying to keep enough of them quiet, which is a tall order. But, you know, we've had some outrageous shocks in this year's championship, so who knows what could happen on the final day. But for the moment, Conor, Michael, thanks so much for joining me.
Cheers, Will.
Cheers, Will.
Thanks, guys. That's all we have time for on the Throne this week in association with Bord Gosh Energy. We'll be back next Monday with a podcast reviewing the All-Ireland football final. And in the meantime, you can subscribe on iTunes, SoundCloud, or listen on independent.ie. So until next Monday, thanks for listening and goodbye.